The little ribbon tied around her wrist had almost lost its color. It had faded beneath years of sunlight, rain, and countless days of hard work inside a tiny countryside bakery. Most people thought it was nothing more than an old piece of cloth that should have been thrown away years ago. But to her, it was the only promise she had ever believed without question. Then, on a quiet summer morning 20 years later, a convoy of black luxury cars rolled into the sleepy village. Everyone rushed outside, whispering that one of Korea's most powerful businessmen had arrived. Some called him a billionaire. Others quietly called him something much more dangerous, the man who had inherited one of the country's most feared mafia empires. As the tall stranger stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, his cold eyes scanned every corner of the village. He wasn't looking for land. He wasn't looking for business. He was looking for a girl who had once smiled at a lonely little boy and a promise he had never forgotten. But what he didn't know was that she still wore the ribbon. She had kept her promise. She simply believed he hadn't kept his. If you love Korean billionaire romance and mafia love stories like this, subscribe now to @Physial_Threads and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Long before people feared his name, he was simply a quiet 10-year-old boy named Min Jae. Every summer, his father would send him away from the suffocating mansion in Seoul to spend a few weeks in the peaceful countryside. Officially, it was for safety. His father had many enemies, and keeping his only son away from the city during tense periods had become a tradition. But Min Jae knew the truth. His father rarely had time for him. His mother had passed away when he was only 6 years old, and after that, silence became the loudest sound inside their enormous home. Servants treated him respectfully, tutors filled his schedule, and bodyguards followed him everywhere. Yet none of them ever treated him like a child. The countryside was different. There were green hills instead of concrete buildings, fresh air instead of expensive perfume, laughter instead of whispered business meetings. And there was one little bakery sitting quietly beside a narrow road. The sweet smell of warm bread drifted through the village every morning before sunrise. That bakery belonged to an elderly African woman named Grandma Safia. Years earlier, she had moved to Korea after marrying a kind local baker. Even after losing her husband, she stayed, becoming one of the most beloved people in the village. Helping her every day was her granddaughter. Her name was Naya. She was the same age as Min Jae. Unlike him, she laughed easily. She greeted everyone by name. She could spend hours talking to birds, feeding stray cats, or decorating bread with tiny flowers made from dough. When Min Jae first arrived that summer, he stood outside the bakery, too shy to enter. Naya noticed him immediately. "You've been staring at the bread for 5 minutes," she teased with a grin. "Either you're very hungry or very nervous." His cheeks turned red. "I wasn't staring." "You were." "I wasn't." She giggled. "Then come inside and prove it." That was the beginning. Every morning after that, Min Jae visited the bakery. Sometimes they helped Grandma Safia knead dough before sunrise. Sometimes they raced through sunflower fields. Sometimes they climbed the old hill overlooking the village and imagined what their futures would look like. Naya dreamed of keeping the bakery alive forever. She wanted it to become a place where lonely people could always find warmth. Min Jae never spoke much about his own future. How could he? Even at 10 years old, he already knew his future wasn't his to choose. His father expected him to inherit everything, including enemies, including fear, including responsibilities no child should ever carry. Still, during those summers, he almost forgot. With Naya beside him, he wasn't the son of a mafia boss. He was simply a little boy discovering happiness for the first time. As the years passed, their friendship deepened. Every summer, he counted the days until he could return. Every summer, she waited outside the bakery the morning she knew he would arrive. Neither of them realized those memories would become the foundation of a love powerful enough to survive 2 decades. Then came the final summer. They were both 10 years old. The village festival filled the streets with music and colorful lanterns. Children laughed while chasing fireflies. Families gathered beneath glowing lights. Min Jae had been unusually quiet all evening. Naya noticed immediately. "You're thinking too much again. I'm leaving tomorrow." "You always leave tomorrow." "This time feels different." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket. Inside was a simple blue ribbon. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't decorated with jewels. He had secretly bought it from an elderly shopkeeper using the little allowance he had saved throughout the summer. "I got this for you." Her eyes sparkled. For me? He nodded nervously. I don't know much about promises. She tilted her head. What kind of promise? His voice trembled slightly. When we grow up. He carefully wrapped the ribbon around her wrist. I'll come back. She smiled. I know. He swallowed. And I'll marry you. For a moment, neither child spoke. The world around them seemed to disappear beneath the glow of lanterns. Naya laughed softly, not because she thought it was childish, but because it sounded so sincere. You have to promise. I promise. She gently held out her little finger. Pinky promise. He hooked his finger around hers. I'll never forget. She smiled brighter than the lanterns above them. Then I'll wait. Neither of them knew destiny was already preparing to separate them. Before dawn the next morning, black vehicles arrived outside the guest house. Men in dark suits rushed through the property. Phones rang nonstop. Bodyguards loaded luggage without explanation. Min Jae woke to raised voices outside his room. His father's closest advisor entered with a pale expression. We're leaving now. But I haven't said goodbye. There isn't time. What happened? The man hesitated before answering. Your father is dead. The words echoed through the silent room. Everything changed in a single heartbeat. Within minutes, the convoy disappeared from the village. Back in Seoul, the funeral lasted only one day before the dangerous world of power swallowed Min Jae completely. Enemies emerged from every direction. Business alliances shifted overnight. His education became harsher. His childhood ended before he understood what grief truly meant. Meanwhile, in the countryside, Naya waited outside the bakery all morning. Then all afternoon. Then until sunset. She thought perhaps he had overslept. Perhaps his driver was late. Perhaps he would arrive tomorrow instead. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. No letters ever came. No phone calls. No explanation. The villagers eventually assumed the wealthy family had simply forgotten the little countryside altogether. Some even told Naya to remove the ribbon. Children say many things, they laughed gently. He was just playing. But every night before sleeping, she touched the faded ribbon. He promised. Grandma Sofia never asked her to take it off. Instead, she simply smiled with quiet understanding. Some promises, the old woman would whisper, take longer roads before they find their way home. 20 years passed. The bakery grew older. The village changed. The ribbon faded, but it never left her wrist. And on a warm summer morning, as the sound of luxury engines echoed through the sleepy streets, destiny quietly returned to the place where it had all begun. Neither of them knew that the first meeting after 20 years would reopen every memory they had tried to bury and awaken feelings that had never truly disappeared. But what happens next would change both of their lives forever. The morning the black convoy entered the village, every conversation came to a halt. Children stopped playing. Farmers leaned against their fences. Shopkeepers stepped outside with curious eyes. Luxury vehicles had never looked so out of place among the quiet stone paths and flower gardens. When the tallest man stepped out of the first car, the air itself seemed to change. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his expression calm, yet unreadable. His posture carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent years making impossible decisions. Behind him stood several assistants and security personnel, but none dared walk ahead of him. To the world, he was one of Korea's youngest billionaires, a brilliant businessman whose company had expanded across Asia. Behind closed doors, powerful men still whispered another title, one inherited, not chosen. He had become the head of the organization his late father once controlled. But unlike the man before him, Min Jae had rebuilt its influence without bloodshed. He believed fear could open doors, but respect kept them open. Very few people knew how lonely that journey had been. As his eyes slowly swept across the village, memories returned with startling clarity. The old bridge where he had nearly fallen into the river. The hill covered with wildflowers every summer. The tiny bakery whose sweet scent always greeted him before sunrise. His heartbeat quickened. It was still there. Smaller than he remembered. Older, but still standing. Without saying a word, he walked toward it. Meanwhile, inside the bakery, Naya carefully arranged fresh loaves on the wooden shelves. The years had transformed her into a graceful young woman whose quiet kindness made customers feel at home the moment they entered. She still wore simple clothes dusted with flour, and her smile remained as warm as the bread she baked every morning. Business had become harder over the years. Large supermarkets had opened in nearby towns. Many young people had moved away. Only loyal customers kept the bakery alive. Still, she refused to leave. Every wall inside the little shop carried memories of her grandmother, who had passed away peacefully 5 years earlier after reminding her of one thing almost every day. Never let your heart become bitter while it's waiting. Naya had tried. She truly had. She no longer expected anyone to return. She simply couldn't throw away the ribbon. It had become part of her. The little bell above the bakery door suddenly chimed. Without looking up, she smiled politely. Good morning. Fresh bread just came out of the oven. Silence answered her. Something about the silence made her lift her head. Standing only a few feet away was a man unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, handsome, elegant. His sharp features looked almost unreal, yet there was sadness hidden behind his composed expression. For a brief second, something inside her heart stirred. Not recognition, just familiarity. She quickly looked away. What can I get for you? Min Jae couldn't answer immediately. The sound of her voice had pulled him 20 years into the past. It was softer now, more mature, yet somehow exactly the same. He glanced around the bakery. Most things had changed. The tables were newer. The walls had fresh paint. But one thing remained untouched. Near the window sat the old wooden chair where two children used to eat warm bread before running outside to play. He smiled without realizing it. I'll have whatever you recommend. Naya wrapped a loaf carefully. Our honey butter bread is still the village favorite. He accepted it with both hands. The recipe hasn't changed? She smiled proudly. Some things shouldn't. Those words lingered between them. As she handed him his change, the sleeve of her cardigan slipped slightly. For the briefest moment, the faded blue ribbon became visible. His breathing stopped. His eyes locked onto it. The ribbon. It was impossible. The color had faded almost completely. The edges were worn with age. But it was the same ribbon. His ribbon. Naya noticed where he was looking and instinctively covered her wrist. I'm sorry, he said gently. I didn't mean to stare. It's old. It looks important. She forced a small smile. It reminds me of someone. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear anything else. He wanted to say her name. He wanted to ask if she remembered. He wanted to tell her that not a single birthday had passed without him thinking about the promise beneath the lanterns. But fear stopped him. What if she had moved on? What if the ribbon meant something completely different now? What if revealing himself too quickly destroyed the simple conversation they were sharing? Instead, he nodded politely. Thank you for the bread. As he reached the door, Naya spoke almost unconsciously. I hope you enjoy your stay. He paused. Without turning around, he answered softly. I think I've been waiting 20 years to come back. Before she could ask what he meant, he was already gone. She stood frozen behind the counter. His words echoed strangely inside her mind. 20 years. Why did those words feel so familiar? That evening, news spread throughout the village that the billionaire had purchased the abandoned estate overlooking the valley. People celebrated. The investment would create jobs. Tourists might finally return. Businesses could survive again. Naya wasn't interested in any of that. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious stranger. There had been something painfully familiar in his eyes. Meanwhile, Min Jae stood alone on the balcony of the renovated estate. The same stars stretched across the countryside sky. His assistant approached quietly. Sir, tomorrow's meeting with the village council has been confirmed. Good. There is something else. What is it? The bakery owner. Min Jae slowly turned. What about her? We investigated after noticing your interest. His expression hardened slightly. And she never married. His heart skipped. Are you certain? Yes. The assistant handed him a file. She refused every proposal. Min Jae stared silently. There were quite a few over the years. A local teacher, a doctor from the neighboring town, even a successful restaurant owner from Seoul who wanted her to move away. And she declined all of them. He lowered the file. Did she ever give a reason? The assistant hesitated. The villagers say she always smiled and answered the same way. What did she say? My heart made a promise before I understood what waiting meant. Min Jae closed his eyes. For 20 years he had blamed himself for leaving without a goodbye. For 20 years he believed she must have forgotten. Instead, she had waited. A wave of guilt crashed over him. Every lonely birthday she had celebrated. Every festival where she must have remembered him. Every year she looked at that ribbon believing he had abandoned his promise. He whispered into the quiet night. I'm sorry. Far below, inside the bakery, Naya stood before an old wooden box filled with childhood treasures. There were dried flowers, tiny seashells, a faded photograph of the village festival, and beneath everything else, a folded piece of paper. She carefully unfolded it. It was a childish drawing. A little boy, a little girl, a bakery, and beneath them, written in uneven handwriting were the words, "I'll come back." She smiled sadly. I guess little boys eventually grow up. Outside, summer rain began falling gently over the village. Neither of them knew fate was preparing another encounter far more personal than the first. Because the following morning, one unexpected act of kindness would make Naya question everything she believed about the mysterious billionaire, while Min Jae would begin realizing that winning her heart again would be far more difficult than simply returning home. The promise had survived 20 years. Now it would have to survive the truth. The rain lingered through the night, leaving the village wrapped in the fresh scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. Before sunrise, Naya unlocked the bakery as she had done nearly every morning for the past 20 years. The familiar routine brought her peace. Mix the flour, warm the butter, prepare the dough, light the ovens. It was the same rhythm her grandmother had taught her as a little girl. The world changes every day, Grandma Sophia used to say, but people will always remember how you made them feel. Naya smiled as she remembered those words. She didn't realize someone was already standing across the street, quietly watching the bakery come to life. Min Jae had arrived long before dawn, not because he had business nearby, simply because he wanted to see the first place that had ever felt like home. When the first customers began arriving, he noticed something that unsettled him. The bakery was busy. People smiled. They complimented the bread. But many walked away carrying only a single loaf. Others quietly apologized before saying they would buy more next month. The village had grown older. Money had become tighter. Even the bakery that once seemed full of endless laughter was now surviving one day at a time. He finally understood why the shelves looked emptier than he remembered. It wasn't because business was booming. It was because Naya baked only what she could afford. His chest tightened. She had never complained. Not once. Later that afternoon, while reviewing investment plans with his executive team inside the estate, one proposal immediately caught his attention. A large retail chain wanted to purchase the land surrounding the bakery. Their plan was simple: demolish several old buildings, construct a modern shopping complex. Profits would multiply within a few years. One executive smiled confidently. This will modernize the entire village. Min Jae closed the file without another glance. No. The room fell silent. The executive looked confused. Sir, the bakery stays. But financially, the bakery stays. His voice remained calm, but no one questioned him again. After the meeting ended, his oldest advisor approached. You've already recognized her, haven't you? Min Jae looked toward the distant bakery through the window. Yes. And she? Not yet. Will you tell her? He remained silent for several seconds. I don't want her to love me because of a promise made by 2 children. The advisor nodded thoughtfully. You want her to choose the man you've become. I owe her that choice. Meanwhile, Naya faced a different problem. The village's annual summer bread festival was only 3 weeks away. For generations, the winning bakery received enough publicity to survive the entire year. But entering the competition required expensive ingredients she simply couldn't afford. As she counted the remaining coins in the register, disappointment quietly settled across her face. Maybe this was the first year she would have to stay out. She sighed softly. I wish Grandma were here. The little bell above the door rang. She looked up. It was him again, the mysterious businessman. He carried no bodyguards this time. Only a simple umbrella. You came back. I told you I planned to stay. She laughed gently. You did. He noticed the nearly empty shelves. Were you very busy? She smiled politely. Busy enough. He could tell she wasn't telling the whole truth. Instead of asking more questions, he pointed toward a handwritten sign advertising bread-making classes for children. You teach. Every Saturday. Do many children come? She looked toward the empty classroom in the corner. Not anymore. The answer saddened him more than she realized. The bakery had once echoed with children's laughter. Now silence occupied most afternoons. An idea slowly formed in his mind. The following morning, the village council announced exciting news. The Billionaires Foundation would sponsor free weekend activities for local children throughout the summer. Art classes, music lessons, cooking workshops, and all baking lessons would be held inside Naya's bakery. When she heard the announcement, she hurried to the council office. There must be a mistake. The village chief smiled warmly. No mistake. But no one asked me. The sponsor specifically requested your bakery. She blinked in confusion. Why? The elderly chief chuckled. He simply said the best bread should always be made where kindness lives. Naya stood speechless. That afternoon, dozens of children filled the bakery. For the first time in years, flour floated through the air as tiny hands laughed while shaping dough into funny animals. Parents bought extra bread while waiting. Business flourished. The bakery felt alive again. Standing quietly outside the window, Min Jae watched the joyful chaos with a smile he rarely showed anyone. His assistant approached. You could simply tell her. He shook his head. Not yet. What if someone else does? I'll take that risk. Inside the bakery, one little girl tugged on Naya's sleeve. Teacher. Yes. That handsome man outside keeps smiling every time you smile. Naya instinctively looked toward the window. Their eyes met. He quickly pretended to admire the flower boxes outside. She couldn't help laughing. Later that evening, after closing the shop, she found a small package waiting outside the door. Inside were several rare baking ingredients she had dreamed of buying for years. Attached was a simple handwritten note. For this year's festival, the village deserves to taste your best. There was no signature. She somehow knew exactly who had sent it. The next morning, she climbed the hill overlooking the village carrying a basket of fresh pastries. She had noticed him walking there every sunrise. Sure enough, he was already standing beneath the old tree where two children once watched the sunrise together. I thought I might find you here. He turned, pleasantly surprised. You brought breakfast. I wanted to say thank you. You don't have to. I do. She handed him a warm pastry. He took a bite and smiled immediately. It tastes exactly the same. She laughed. Exactly the same as what? He almost answered. Instead, he simply said, as something I remembered. They sat together overlooking the valley. Comfortable silence settled between them. For the first time in years, neither of them felt lonely. After a while, Naya spoke quietly. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why this village? There are thousands like it. He looked toward the distant bakery. Because someone precious once lived here. Her heartbeat unexpectedly quickened. Did you lose that person? He smiled sadly. No. I lost the chance to explain why I disappeared. Those words struck her heart with surprising force. She looked down at the faded ribbon on her wrist. I knew someone like that once. He swallowed carefully. What happened? He promised he'd come back. And I waited. For how long? She laughed softly, though her eyes glistened. Long enough that people started calling me foolish. Were they right? She gently touched the ribbon. I don't know. I used to believe promises never disappeared. Her voice became almost a whisper. But eventually, she forced herself to smile. You have to accept that some people belong only in beautiful memories. Every word pierced his heart. She truly believed he had forgotten. Not betrayed. Not lied. Simply forgotten. At that moment, he realized the greatest wound he had ever caused wasn't leaving. It was allowing her to spend 20 years believing she had never been worth returning for. He wanted nothing more than to tell her everything. But before he could speak, his phone rang. His expression changed the moment he saw the caller. It was the elderly family advisor who had protected him since childhood. The old man's voice sounded unusually serious. There is something you need to know. What happened? I found a letter. Min Jae frowned. What letter? A letter written by your father the night before he died. His heartbeat quickened. It concerns the little girl from the village. Min Jae stood frozen. My father knew about her. There are truths that should have been told 20 years ago. As the call ended, Min Jae slowly lowered the phone. Across from him, Naya watched the color leave his face. What is it? He forced a reassuring smile. Just unfinished business. But deep inside, he knew everything was about to change. Because whatever was written inside that forgotten letter had remained hidden for 2 decades. And if it involved his father, it might explain why fate had separated 2 children who had done nothing more than make a simple promise beneath glowing summer lanterns. Neither of them knew that the truth waiting inside that letter would not destroy their love. Instead, it would reveal that someone had been protecting that promise all along. The drive back to Seoul was the longest journey Min Jae could remember. The letter rested inside the inner pocket of his jacket, Yet he could not bring himself to open it until he reached the quiet library of the family estate. The room had remained untouched since his father passed away. Rows of old books lined the walls. A portrait of his parents overlooked the fireplace. On the desk lay a wooden box that his elderly advisor had kept hidden for 2 decades. I was instructed to give this to you when I believed you were finally free to make your own decisions, the old man said softly. Min-jae looked at him in disbelief. Why now? Because when I saw the way you looked at that young woman in the village, I realized you had finally returned, not as the frightened little boy your father left behind, but as the man he hoped you would become. His hands trembled as he unfolded the yellowed letter. The handwriting belonged to his father. If you're reading this, then I couldn't keep my promise to tell you these things myself. First, forgive me. I spent too many years teaching you how to become strong, and too few teaching you how to be happy. There is something else you deserve to know. I met the little girl from the bakery. She reminds me of the kindness your mother carried. When I saw you smiling beside her, I understood something I had ignored for years. Power means nothing if it steals your child's laughter. If fate allows, return to that village someday. Find the girl with the ribbon. If she still wishes to walk beside you, never let my world become the reason you lose yours. Tears blurred Min-jae's vision. He continued reading. The morning we left the village, I planned to return after settling the dangers surrounding our family. But I was betrayed before sunrise. I fear my enemies already know about the village. That is why I ordered everyone to leave immediately without saying goodbye. I would rather have one broken promise than place innocent lives in danger. If I fail to survive, please tell her I never wanted you to forget. I only wanted her to live. The letter slipped from Min-jae's fingers. For 20 years, he had believed fate had stolen his chance. Now he realized his father had sacrificed that chance to protect the 2 people he loved most. The elderly advisor quietly placed another envelope beside him. What is this? A bank account. Min-jae frowned. It belonged to your father. Inside was a single document showing yearly deposits made every summer for 20 years. The recipient was listed simply as Village Children's Bakery Fund. Min-jae looked up in confusion. The bakery? The advisor nodded. Your father arranged for anonymous donations every year. He feared direct contact would expose the village, so he protected it from afar. A tear rolled down Min-jae's cheek. His father had never stopped thinking about them. Neither had he. The following morning, he returned to the countryside before sunrise. This time, he carried no assistance. No security. No expensive watch. Only the ribbon's matching piece that he had kept inside his childhood memory box all these years. Meanwhile, Naya had already begun preparing dough when she heard the familiar bell above the bakery door. She smiled without looking. You're early today. I didn't want to lose another day. Something in his voice made her turn around. His expression was different. There was no hesitation anymore. Only quiet certainty. May we talk? She nodded. Together they walked toward the hill overlooking the village. The same hill where 2 children once dreamed beneath endless summer skies. The breeze gently carried the scent of fresh bread from the bakery below. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Min-jae reached into his pocket. He unfolded the tiny piece of faded blue ribbon he had kept for 20 years. Naya's eyes widened. Her breathing caught. No. He smiled through tears. I told you I'd never forget. She stared at him. The voice. The smile. The way he looked at the sunrise before speaking. Every forgotten memory suddenly rushed back at once. Min-jae. Hearing his name from her lips after 20 years nearly broke him. I'm sorry. His voice trembled. I'm sorry I never came back. She shook her head, tears already falling. You forgot. I never did. He handed her the letter. As she read every word, tears fell onto the faded paper. When she reached the final sentence, she pressed the letter against her heart. All those years, she had blamed neither him nor herself. She had simply believed life had chosen different paths. Now she finally understood. The promise had never been abandoned. It had been protected. She looked at him through tear-filled eyes. So every summer. He nodded. I thought about you. The ribbon. I kept the other half. The bakery? My father never stopped helping from afar. She smiled through tears. Grandma used to tell me that some promises take longer roads before they find their way home. Min-jae laughed softly. She was right. For the first time in 20 years, Naya slowly untied the faded ribbon from her wrist. The cloth had become fragile with age. She carefully placed it into his hand. I've carried this long enough. He looked at her with concern. Are you letting go? She smiled more brightly than he had ever seen. No. She gently wrapped the old ribbon around both of their joined hands. I'm sharing the promise now. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. Without thinking, he whispered the words he had spoken as a 10-year-old boy. When I grow up. She laughed through happy tears. I'll come back and marry you. I finally did. Several months later, the village gathered beneath hundreds of glowing lanterns for a celebration unlike any they had ever seen. There were no luxury decorations, no grand ballroom, no extravagant displays of wealth. Min-jae had insisted on only one location, the bakery garden. Long wooden tables overflowed with fresh bread, homemade pastries, and flowers gathered by the villagers. Children who had attended Naya's baking classes filled the air with laughter. Many of the elderly guests quietly wiped away tears as they watched the couple exchange vows beneath the old tree overlooking the valley. Instead of expensive jewelry, Min-jae surprised everyone with something far more meaningful. A delicate bracelet. At its center rested the preserved blue ribbon, carefully protected beneath clear crystal. So it never fades again, he whispered. Naya smiled as he fastened it around her wrist. This time, she said softly, we'll grow old keeping the promise together. Years passed. The bakery became famous across Korea, not because it was the biggest, but because every visitor could feel something impossible to describe the moment they stepped inside. Warmth. Hope. Home. Min-jae continued leading his business empire with wisdom rather than fear. He invested in small villages, family businesses, and children's education, believing that true strength was measured by the lives you lifted rather than the people you intimidated. Every summer, they organized a festival for children beneath the lanterns where their story had begun. Whenever young couples asked how they met, they never started with wealth. They never mentioned power. They simply smiled and pointed toward the little blue ribbon displayed inside a glass frame near the bakery entrance. Because the greatest promise is never the one spoken in perfect circumstances. It is the one remembered through impossible ones. Their story became proof that love does not measure time by calendars. It measures faith. Sometimes life separates people not to end their story, but to prepare them for the moment they can finally love each other without fear. Status may impress the world. Power may command respect. But kindness, loyalty, patience, and a promise kept by two sincere hearts will always outlast them all. If you made it this far, let us know where you're watching from, and comment your favorite moment below, like this video, and subscribe to @Physial_Threads for more emotional Mafia love stories.